Montana Territory, 1872. The winter wind howled across the vast prairie like a vengeful spirit, driving needles of ice before it. Against this merciless backdrop, a lone figure on horseback pressed forward, hunched against the punishing cold. At 26, August Everett had already seen enough of life's cruelties to know that the frontier showed no mercy to the unprepared or the unlucky. And on this bitter December afternoon, with the light fading and the temperature plummeting, he knew he was flirting with death. August had one rule that had served him well during his years working cattle in Montana Territory. Trust only what you can control. The land was unpredictable, people even more so. He had buried his parents young, watched friends fall to disease, accidents, and violence. The lesson had been burned into him. Attachment was a luxury he could not afford. The frontier was no place for sentiment or softness. "Come on, renegade," he urged his bay stallion forward. "Just a few more miles to the line shack." The horse snorted, frost forming on its nostrils as its hooves crunched through the crusted snow. August had been riding fence on the northern boundary of the Crooked Creek Ranch when the storm had advanced faster than expected. Now his goal was simple survival until morning. He squinted through the fading light and swirling snow, trying to make out landmarks that would guide him to the crude shelter where he kept emergency supplies. His fingers were numb inside his leather gloves, and his face felt raw where it was exposed to the wind. August had no illusions about his place in this harsh country. At the Crooked Creek, he was valued for his skill with horses, his steady hand with a gun, and his willingness to take on the hardest tasks without complaint. His boss, Hank Williams, was fair enough, but August kept his distance from the other hands. Better that way. No attachments meant no disappointments. In the distance, something caught his eye, a dark shape against the white landscape that didn't belong. August pulled Renegade to a halt, narrowing his eyes. It looked like a wagon, out here miles from the nearest trail. He hesitated only a moment before turning toward it. Someone else caught in the storm meant trouble, and trouble was something August preferred to avoid. But leaving another soul to freeze to death wasn't something his conscience would allow, no matter how much he preferred his solitude. As he approached, the scene became clearer. A small wagon with one wheel broken completely off its axle, no horse in sight. And huddled against the far side, using the wagon as minimal shelter against the driving wind, was a figure so still he feared he might be too late. "Hello there," he called, his voice snatched away by the wind. The figure stirred and relief coursed through him. Still alive, then, August dismounted, his boots sinking into the snow as he approached. The figure looked up and August stopped short. A woman young with a wool scarf wrapped around her head, her face pale with cold but unmistakably feminine. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "And not hurt," she managed through chattering teeth. "Just sea cold." Her eyes were a startling blue, even in the dimming light. August assessed her quickly, no visible injuries, but her lips had a bluish tint that alarmed him. Hypothermia was setting in. "I'm August Everett, ma'am. I work at Crooked Creek Ranch. There's a line shack about 2 miles from here. Can you ride?" She nodded weakly. Sophia Montrose." Her voice was soft, cultured. "Not from around here, that was certain." "What happened to your horse?" August asked as he helped her to her feet. Spooked by the storm, broke free. She stumbled and he caught her arm. "Everything happened so fast." "We need to move quickly," August said, his tone businesslike. He didn't ask what a young woman was doing out here alone. That could wait. Temperatures dropping fast. He helped her to Renegade and lifted her into the saddle before mounting behind her. He could feel her trembling against him as he turned the horse toward the line shack. "Hold on," he instructed, wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her secure. "We'll have you warm soon enough." The ride seemed endless, with the wind cutting through his coat and the daylight almost gone. The woman, Sophia, leaned heavily against him, her consciousness seemingly fading. "Stay awake," he urged, giving her a gentle shake. "Talk to me. Where were you headed?" "Helena," she murmured. "I was going to meet my uncle." August frowned. She was miles off course if Helena was her destination. But there would be time for questions later. For now, keeping her alive was all that mattered. When the small log structure of the line shack finally appeared through the swirling snow, August felt a rush of relief. He dismounted first, then helped Sophia down, practically carrying her the few steps to the door. Inside, the shack was cold but offered blessed relief from the wind. August worked quickly, striking a match to light the coal oil lamp on the small table, then setting to work on the pot-bellied stove. He had stocked the shack himself last month, dry wood, matches, some basic provisions. Within minutes, a small fire was crackling, beginning to push back the biting cold. He turned to Sophia, who had sunk down onto the single wooden chair, her eyes half closed. "Ma'am, you need to get out of those wet clothes," he said matter-of-factly. "I've got some spare things in my saddlebag. They'll be too big, but they're dry." She looked up at him, a flicker of wariness crossing her face. "I'll step outside while you change," he added quickly, understanding her concern, "but you need to hurry. Wet clothes will kill you faster than anything in this cold." He retrieved a flannel shirt and a pair of wool socks from his saddlebag, along with a blanket, and handed them to her. "I need to see to my horse. I'll knock before I come back in." Outside, the storm was intensifying, the wind howling like a pack of wolves. August worked efficiently to unsaddle Renegade and lead him to the small lean-to attached to the back of the shack. It wasn't much, but it would keep the worst of the weather off the animal. He rubbed the horse down as best he could and gave him a handful of oats from the small supply kept in a tin trunk. "Sorry, boy," he murmured, patting the horse's neck. Not much of a welcome after a long ride. When he'd done all he could for Renegade, August stomped back through the deepening snow to the front of the shack. He knocked firmly on the door. "Ma'am, you decent?" "Yes," came the faint reply. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. The sight that greeted him made something catch in his chest. Sophia sat close to the stove, wrapped in his blanket, her wet clothes draped over the back of the chair to dry. His shirt was enormous on her small frame, the sleeves rolled up multiple times. But it was her face that caught his attention. With her scarf removed, her hair tumbled around her shoulders in waves of rich chestnut brown. Her face, though still pale, revealed delicate features and those striking blue eyes that regarded him with cautious gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply. August nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with the intimacy of their situation. He was not a man accustomed to sharing small spaces with beautiful women. "Let me get some coffee going," he said, moving to the small shelf where basic provisions were stored. "You need to warm up from the inside, too." As he worked, he found himself stealing glances at her. She couldn't be older than 22, he guessed, and her hands with their slender fingers suggested she wasn't accustomed to hard labor. "What was someone like her doing out here alone? How are you feeling?" he asked as he set the coffee pot on the stove. "Better," she replied, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I think you saved my life, Mr. Everett." "August," he corrected automatically, and anyone would have done the same. She smiled slightly. "Not everyone, and not everyone would have found me before," she trailed off, not needing to complete the thought. "What were you doing out there alone, if you don't mind my asking?" August said, trying to keep his tone conversational rather than accusatory. Sophia looked down at her hands. "It's a long story." "Well, ma'am, we've got nothing but time until this storm blows over, and that could be a while." She sighed, a sound so weary it seemed to come from someone far older. "I was traveling with a freight wagon from Bozeman. The driver agreed to take me as far as Helena, but yesterday," her voice faltered, "he became inappropriate. When I refused his advances, he put me out, said I could find my own way. Gave me that small wagon and an old mule that was half lame already." August felt his jaw tighten with anger. To abandon a woman in this country, especially with winter closing in, was as good as a death sentence. "Did you get his name?" She nodded. "Harlan Deeks." August filed the name away. If their paths ever crossed, Mr. Deeks would have much to answer for. "And what's in Helena?" he asked, pouring the now boiling coffee into 2 tin cups. "My uncle Thomas Montrose, he owns a store there. After my father died last spring, there was nothing left for me in Boston. Uncle Thomas wrote that I could come west, help with his business." She accepted the coffee he offered with a grateful nod. "I've never been west of the Mississippi before." "Quite a change from Boston," August observed. "Yes," she agreed with a small smile, "though I must say it hasn't been the adventure the novels promised." Despite himself, August felt his lips quirk upward. "No, ma'am, those dime novels leave out quite a bit about the realities of frontier life." They fell into silence, sipping their coffee as the wind rattled the single window of the shack. August realized he was staring and forced himself to look away. It had been a long time since he'd been in such close quarters with anyone, let alone a woman whose presence made him acutely aware of his own rough edges. "We'll need to share the provisions," he said, more to break the silence than anything else. "I've got some jerky and hardtack, not much of a feast, but it'll keep body and soul together until morning." "You're very kind," Sophia said, watching him as he moved around the small space. The comment made him uncomfortable. "Just doing what needs doing," he replied shortly. He busied himself with taking inventory of their supplies, aware of her eyes following him. August was not used to being studied so openly. He kept mostly to himself at the ranch, doing his work efficiently and avoiding the rowdy gatherings the other hands enjoyed in town. Some of the men called him standoffish. He preferred to think of it as self-sufficient. "Will the storm last long?" Sophia asked. August glanced toward the window where snow was already piling up against the glass. "Hard to say. These early winter storms can blow themselves out by morning or they can last for days." He saw worry flicker across her face and added, "We've got enough supplies here for a few days if need be. And once it clears, I can get you to Helena." "You would do that?" "Can't very well leave you out here on your own, ma'am," he said with a shrug. "Helena's a fair ride, but not impossible." "Please call me Sophia," she said. "After all, we are sharing rather close quarters." August nodded, though using her given name felt like crossing a boundary he'd carefully maintained with others. "You should try to eat something, Sophia, then get some sleep. You've had a rough day." He handed her some jerky and hardtack, which she accepted gratefully. As they ate their meager meal, August found himself watching the way the firelight played across her features, highlighting the delicate curve of her cheekbone, the graceful line of her throat. He looked away quickly when she caught his eye. "There's only one bunk," he said when they had finished eating. "You take it. I'll manage fine on the floor near the stove." "I couldn't possibly." "Please," he interrupted. "I've slept in far worse conditions. A wooden floor and a roof over my head is luxury compared to some nights I've spent out here." She looked as if she might argue further, but exhaustion was evident in the droop of her shoulders. "Thank you," she said finally. August spread his bedroll on the floor while Sophia settled onto the narrow bunk, still wrapped in the blanket. He added more wood to the stove, ensuring it would burn through most of the night, then extinguished the lamp. In the darkness, with only the soft orange glow from the stove's vents providing any light, August lay back and listened to the howl of the wind. He was acutely aware of Sophia's presence just a few feet away, her breathing gradually slowing as she drifted into sleep. August closed his eyes, but sleep eluded him. His mind kept returning to the image of Sophia as she might have been, alone in that broken wagon, slowly freezing to death. The thought disturbed him more than it should have. He had seen death before; it was an ever-present reality on the frontier. But the idea of this young woman's light being extinguished seemed particularly wrong. It was just human decency, he told himself. Anyone would feel the same. It had nothing to do with the way her eyes had lit up when she smiled, or how brave she'd been in the face of circumstances that would have broken many. As he finally began to drift into sleep, August made himself a promise. He would see Sophia Montrose safely to Helena, and then he would return to his solitary life at Crooked Creek. No complications, no attachments. It was safer that way, but even as he made this resolution, something deep within him recognized it as a lie. Morning brought a temporary lull in the storm. August woke at first light, his body stiff from the hard floor but his mind alert. He added wood to the nearly dead fire, trying to move quietly so as not to wake Sophia. But as he turned from the stove, he found her watching him, her blue eyes clear in the gray morning light. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied, suddenly aware of how disheveled he must look. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling self-conscious. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," she admitted, sitting up. "Though I'm afraid I've imposed terribly on you." "No imposition," he said, turning back to the stove to hide his discomfort. "Coffee." "Please." While the coffee boiled, August moved to the window, wiping a circle in the frost-covered glass to peer outside. Snow had drifted high against the walls of the shack and the sky remained ominously gray. The brief lull was deceptive. The storm wasn't finished with them yet. "How does it look?" Sophia asked, coming to stand beside him. August was conscious of her nearness, the faint scent of lavender that somehow clung to her despite their circumstances. Not good, he admitted. There's more coming, we'd best stay put for now. She nodded, accepting his assessment without question. I suppose we'll have to make the best of it. For the first time, August allowed himself to really look at her in the full light of day. Her chestnut hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and without the pallor of near freezing, her complexion was fair and unblemished. She was quite beautiful, but it was the intelligence and resilience in her eyes that truly captured his attention. Your clothes should be dry, he said, breaking away from his thoughts. I'll step outside while you change. Thank you, she said. But please don't go far, it's still terribly cold out there. August nodded and stepped outside, pulling his coat tight around him. The air was biting, the kind of cold that made each breath painful. He walked around to check on Renegade, finding the horse stamping impatiently in the small lean-to. Sorry, boy, he murmured, patting the animal's neck. We're stuck for a while longer. He gave Renegade some more oats and made sure the horse had access to water that wasn't completely frozen over. By the time he returned to the front of the shack, his fingers were numb despite his gloves. He knocked on the door. Sophia, may I come in? Yes, please do, came her reply. When he entered, he found her dressed in her own clothes again, a simple dress of deep green wool that complemented her coloring. She had done something to her hair as well, pulling it back and securing it at the nape of her neck. The effect was striking, transforming her from a bedraggled survivor to a composed young lady who wouldn't have looked out of place in a Helena parlor. The coffee's ready, she said, gesturing to the pot. I hope you don't mind that I served myself. Not at all, he replied, trying not to stare. He accepted the cup she offered him, their fingers brushing momentarily. Thank you. They settled into an awkward silence, sipping their coffee and listening to the wind as it began to pick up again outside. August found himself searching for something to say, unaccustomed to making conversation. Tell me about your ranch, Sophia said finally, saving him from his discomfort. It's not my ranch, he corrected. I just work there. Crooked Creek belongs to Hank Williams. Been working for him going on 3 years now. Do you enjoy it? August considered the question. It's good, honest work. Hank's fair, pays on time. The other hands mind their business, I mind mine. It sounds rather solitary, Sophia observed. I prefer it that way, August said, perhaps too quickly. Fewer complications. Sophia studied him over the rim of her cup. Everyone needs someone, Mr. Everett. August, he reminded her, then shook his head. And I've found that's not necessarily true. Out here, depending on others can be dangerous. People leave, or they die, or they disappoint you. Better to rely on yourself. That's a rather bleak outlook, she said softly. August shrugged. Just realistic. Is that why you're out here alone, checking fences in December? He gave her a sharp look. Someone has to do it, might as well be me. Because you have no one waiting for you. The question was gentle, without judgment, but it struck uncomfortably close to home. Because I'm good at my job, he said flatly. Sophia nodded, accepting his rebuff without offense. Well, I'm grateful it was you riding fence yesterday. Someone less capable might not have spotted me or known what to do. The genuine gratitude in her voice made August uncomfortable. He wasn't used to being thanked, especially not by women with eyes that seemed to see right through him. I should check our supplies, he said, standing abruptly. If this storm keeps up, we might need to ration. As he busied himself with the practical task of inventorying their food, August tried to shake off the unsettling feeling that Sophia Montrose had somehow seen past the barriers he'd so carefully constructed around himself. He had survived this long by keeping his distance, by not letting anyone close enough to matter. One stranded Eastern woman wasn't going to change that, no matter how perceptive she might be. But as the day wore on, trapped together in the small shack while the storm raged outside, August found it increasingly difficult to maintain his usual reserve. Sophia was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in his stories of life on the ranch, and surprisingly knowledgeable about a wide range of subjects. My father believed in education for both boys and girls, she explained when he expressed surprise at her familiarity with literature he had only vaguely heard of. He was a professor at Harvard before his health began to fail. Our home was filled with books. And yet you left all that to come to Montana Territory. August couldn't hide his curiosity. Most people are trying to get east, not the other way around. A shadow passed over Sophia's face. After father died, there wasn't much left for me in Boston. The house had to be sold to pay his debts. My mother passed when I was 12 and I have no siblings. Uncle Thomas is my only living relative. Still, August persisted, Helena's a far cry from Boston. Perhaps I wanted an adventure, she said, a small smile playing at her lips. Or perhaps I simply had no choice. August sensed there was more to her story than she was sharing, but he didn't press. Everyone had things they preferred to keep private. Lord knows he did. By late afternoon, it became clear that they would be spending another night in the line shack. The storm had intensified again, snow driving horizontally past the window on winds strong enough to make the sturdy log walls creak. "We're going to have to make this food last," August said as he prepared a simple meal of beans heated over the stove. "No telling how long we'll be here." Sophia nodded, helping by slicing the last of their bread into thin portions. "At least we're warm and dry. That's more than many have in weather like this." Her practicality impressed him. Many city women would have been complaining bitterly about their circumstances by now, but Sophia seemed to take it all in stride. As they ate, sitting close to the stove for warmth, August found himself wanting to know more about her. "What will you do in Helena? Work in your uncle's store?" "That's the plan," she replied. "Though I've never worked in retail before. I was a teacher in Boston for a time at a small ladies' academy. I hope there might be opportunity for that in Helena eventually." "A teacher?" August was surprised. "You seem young to be teaching." "I'm 23, she said with a smile. "Old enough to have completed my own education and to instruct younger girls. What about you? Have you always been a cowboy?" August shook his head. "I grew up in Missouri. My father had a small farm. When he and my mother died of influenza, there wasn't much reason to stay. I drifted west, worked as a freight driver for a while, then found I had a way with horses. Been working ranches ever since." "How old were you when your parents died?" she asked gently. 17, he replied, surprised at himself for sharing even this much. He rarely spoke of his past. "So you've been on your own for quite some time." 9 years, he confirmed. "You learned to manage." "Yes," she agreed, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You do, but it doesn't mean you have to like it." The simple observation, delivered without pity or judgment, hit August with unexpected force. No, he didn't like being alone. He had just convinced himself it was safer that way. They fell silent, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. August found himself studying Sophia's profile, the graceful curve of her neck, the way her lashes cast shadows on her cheeks in the firelight. Something stirred in him that had been dormant for a very long time, a longing for connection that he had ruthlessly suppressed. "I should add more wood to the fire," he said abruptly, standing. "It's going to be a cold night." As he moved to the small woodpile in the corner, August silently chided himself. He was behaving like a green boy, not a man who had learned the hard way that attachments were dangerous. In a day or two, the storm would pass. He would take Sophia to Helena, where she would begin her new life with her uncle, and he would return to Crooked Creek. Their paths had crossed briefly, that was all. No need to make more of it. But as they prepared for their second night in the confined space of the line shack, August found himself increasingly aware of her every movement, every expression. When she laughed at something, he said, a wry observation about one of the more colorful characters at Crooked Creek. The sound affected him like sunlight after a long winter. This time, when he insisted she take the bunk again, Sophia was more adamant in her refusal. "You're too tall for that floor," she argued. "Your back must be aching from last night. Please, I'm much smaller." "The floor won't trouble me nearly as much." "That's not happening," August said firmly. "My mother would rise from her grave and haunt me if I let a lady sleep on a hard floor while I took the bed." "Your mother sounds like a formidable woman," Sophia observed with a smile. "She was," August agreed, his expression softening at the memory. "Kind, but you didn't cross her if you valued your hide." "Well, I wouldn't want to bring her wrath upon you," Sophia conceded. "But I still feel terrible about the arrangement." August shrugged as he spread his bedroll. "Like I said yesterday, I've slept in worse places." As they settled in for the night, the wind seemed to intensify, whistling through the smallest cracks in the cabin's construction. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and despite the fire, the small space was growing colder by the hour. August lay awake, listening to Sophia's breathing, which hadn't yet settled into the rhythm of sleep. The cold was likely keeping her awake as well. He added another log to the stove, trying to coax more heat from it. August, her voice came softly through the darkness. Yes. Thank you not just for finding me yesterday, but for being kind. Not every man would have been. The simple gratitude in her voice touched something in him. You don't need to thank me for basic decency, Sophia. But I do, she insisted. There's precious little of it in this world sometimes. August couldn't argue with that. He had seen enough of human nature to know that kindness wasn't always the natural response, especially on the frontier where survival often came at a cost. Try to get some sleep, he said finally. Tomorrow might bring better weather. But August's hopeful prediction proved wrong. The dawn brought no relief, only the continued howl of the wind and fresh snow piling against the door and window. When he managed to force the door open enough to check outside, he was met with a world transformed into white. Drifts had accumulated against the side of the shack, nearly reaching the window in places. We're not going anywhere today, he reported, closing the door against the bitter cold. Maybe not tomorrow either. Sophia accepted this news with remarkable composure. Then we'll need to be careful with our supplies. Let me see what we have left. Together they took stock. Enough coffee for a few more days if they were sparing, beans and bacon that could last with careful rationing, a bit of flour that could be made into simple biscuits. Water they could get from snow melted over the fire. It wasn't an abundance, but it would sustain them. We'll manage, Sophia said confidently. Her optimism was infectious. August found himself nodding in agreement despite his usual inclination toward caution. Yes, we will. The day stretched before them, empty of obligations but full of the small necessities of survival. August tended to renegade, breaking through ice to ensure the horse had water, sharing some of their precious oats. Sophia organized their supplies and even managed to fashion a crude broom from a bundle of twigs to sweep the dirt floor. In the confined space, they established a rhythm, moving around each other with increasing familiarity. August found himself noticing small things about Sophia. The way she hummed softly while she worked, the careful precision with which she measured coffee, the graceful economy of her movements. To pass the time, they talked. August surprised himself with how much he shared, stories of his childhood in Missouri, his first cattle drive, the characters he'd encountered in his years on the frontier. Sophia was an attentive listener, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. In turn, she told him about growing up in Boston, her years at the Ladies' Academy, her father's gradual decline after her mother's death. He never really recovered from losing her, Sophia said, a shadow crossing her face. They had the kind of love you read about in novels, complete, consuming. When she died, it was as if the best part of him went with her. That's the danger, August said without thinking. Loving someone that much leaves you vulnerable. Sophia looked at him thoughtfully. Yes, but isn't that vulnerability worth the joy they had together, 20 years of perfect happiness, rather than a lifetime of safe mediocrity? The question struck at the heart of August's carefully constructed philosophy. He had convinced himself that emotional distance was strength, that independence was security. But Sophia's words made him wonder what he might be sacrificing for that security. Maybe for some, he said finally. Not everyone gets that kind of happiness, vulnerable or not. No, she agreed softly. But I think more might find it if they weren't so afraid to try. Her eyes met his, and August felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the barriers they both maintained, though for different reasons. The day passed in this way, conversation flowing more easily than August would have thought possible with someone he'd known for such a short time. By evening, as they shared another simple meal, he realized with some surprise that he was actually enjoying their enforced isolation. What is it? Sophia asked, catching him looking at her. Nothing, he said quickly, just thinking that for being stranded in a blizzard this isn't so bad. She smiled, her face illuminated by the glow from the stove. No, it isn't. Strange how circumstances throw people together sometimes, isn't it? If you hadn't found me yesterday. But I did, he interrupted, not wanting to contemplate the alternative. Yes, she said softly. You did. That night, as they prepared for sleep, the temperature dropped precipitously. The wind found every crack in the cabin walls, and despite August's best efforts with the fire, the cold was becoming dangerous. "This is ridiculous," Sophia said through chattering teeth as she huddled on the bunk. "We'll freeze like this." August, who had been trying to ignore his own shivering, looked up from his place on the floor. The storm's making it colder than usual. "Body heat would help, but—" "Then that's what we'll do," she said decisively. "There's no sense in propriety if we're both going to freeze to death." August hesitated. The idea of sharing the narrow bunk with Sophia sent a jolt of alarm through him, not because he feared his own conduct, but because it represented exactly the kind of intimacy he had been avoiding for years. "August," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "it's practical, nothing more, please." He couldn't argue with her logic. With reluctance born not of disinterest but of self-preservation, August rose from his bedroll and moved to the bunk. It was barely wide enough for two, requiring them to lie close together. He positioned himself on the outside edge, trying to maintain some semblance of space between them. "This isn't going to work if you're half falling off," Sophia observed. "I promise not to bite." Despite himself, August smiled at her attempt at humor. He shifted slightly, allowing their bodies to align. The immediate warmth was undeniable, as was the scent of her hair, somehow still carrying that hint of lavender despite their primitive conditions. "Better?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Much," she replied, and he could hear the relief in her voice as her shivering began to subside. They lay in silence for a time, the awkwardness gradually fading as the practical benefits of their arrangement became apparent. August found himself relaxing incrementally, his body responding to the simple human comfort of contact after so long without it. "August," Sophia's voice was soft in the darkness. "Tell me something true about yourself. Something you don't usually tell people." The request caught him off guard. "Why?" "Because we're strangers whose circumstances have forced into intimacy," she replied. "Because sometimes it's easier to be honest with someone you may never see again." August was quiet for so long that Sophia might have thought he'd fallen asleep, but he was considering her request, weighing his habitual privacy against the strange connection he felt with this woman he barely knew. "I write poetry," he said finally, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "Not good poetry, mind you, but sometimes when I'm out riding fence or keeping watch over the herd at night, words come to me. I keep a small notebook. No one at the ranch knows." He felt Sophia shift slightly, turning her head toward him though he couldn't see her face in the darkness. "That doesn't surprise me as much as you might think," she said. "There's a sensitivity in how you observe things. I noticed it in how you described the landscape yesterday." August had never considered himself sensitive. It wasn't a quality much valued among cowboys. But Sophia's perception made him reconsider how he presented himself to the world. "Your turn," he said. "Something true." She was quiet for a moment, and he felt her breathing change slightly. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Coming west was brave on the surface, but really it was running away. After my father died, I received an offer of marriage from a man I didn't love, a colleague of my father's, much older but secure. Everyone said I should accept, that a woman alone has few options. But I couldn't bear the thought of a loveless marriage, so I fled. Sometimes I wonder if I made a terrible mistake." The vulnerability in her confession moved August. "If the alternative was sacrificing your chance at real happiness, it wasn't a mistake," he said. "Better to face uncertainty than resign yourself to something you know would make you miserable." "That's quite philosophical coming from a cowboy," she teased gently. "Even cowboys have thoughts now and then," he replied, surprised at how easy it was to banter with her. They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now, filled with new understanding. August found himself acutely aware of the rise and fall of Sophia's breathing, the warmth of her back against his chest, the faint scent of her hair. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to acknowledge the loneliness that had become so familiar he hardly noticed it anymore. As Sophia's breathing deepened into sleep, August remained awake, contemplating the strange turn his life had taken. 2 days ago, he had been riding fence in solitude, secure in his conviction that attachment was a luxury he could not afford. Now sharing a narrow bunk with a woman who was rapidly becoming more than just a stranger he had rescued, he found that conviction wavering. It was temporary, he reminded himself. A circumstance forced upon them by the storm. Once the weather cleared, they would go their separate ways, Sophia to her new life in Helena, he back to Crooked Creek. This unexpected connection, this brief respite from solitude, would become just another memory, eventually fading like all the others. But as he finally drifted toward sleep, August couldn't help wondering if something fundamental had already changed, not in his circumstances, but in himself. The third day dawned with a subtle change. When August opened his eyes, aware of Sophia's warmth still pressed against him, he realized the constant howl of the wind had diminished to an occasional gust. Moving carefully to avoid waking her, he extricated himself from the bunk and went to the window, wiping away the frost to peer outside. The storm had passed. The landscape was transformed, buried under feet of fresh snow that sparkled in the early morning sun. The sky above was a clear, piercing blue, so bright it almost hurt to look at it after days of gray gloom. "Is it over?" Sophia's voice came from behind him, still husky with sleep. August turned to find her sitting up in the bunk, her hair tousled, her eyes still heavy-lidded. The sight of her this way, soft with sleep and illuminated by the sunlight filtering through the window, caused something to catch in his chest. "Yes," he managed. "Storm's passed, but there's a lot of snow out there. It's going to make travel difficult." Sophia pushed back the blankets and came to stand beside him at the window. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the pristine landscape. "Beautiful but dangerous," August cautioned. "Drifts like that can hide all kinds of hazards. We'll need to be careful when we head out." "When do you think we can leave?" There was a note in her voice that August couldn't quite interpret, eagerness to reach her destination, perhaps, or maybe reluctance to end their unexpected interlude. "Not today," he decided. "The snow needs to settle and Renegade needs rest. Tomorrow if the weather holds." She nodded, accepting his judgment without question. "Then we have one more day here." "Is that all right?" he asked, suddenly concerned that she might be impatient to be rid of him, to reach the relative civilization of Helena. "Yes," she said simply, meeting his eyes. "It's all right." They fell into the routine they had established over the past 2 days, preparing a spare breakfast, tending to necessary tasks. But there was a new awareness between them, a tension that hadn't been there before. August found himself watching Sophia when she wasn't looking, noting the graceful efficiency of her movements, the way sunlight caught in her hair when she passed the window. With the storm past, August was able to venture further from the cabin. He checked on Renegade, then shoveled a path through the snow to reach a fallen tree he had spotted from the window. With his axe, he cut enough wood to resupply their dwindling stack and ensure they would stay warm for their final night. When he returned, arms laden with split wood, he found Sophia had used their limited supplies to create something approaching a proper meal. Biscuits baked in the small Dutch oven and a stew made from their remaining beans and bacon. "I thought we should celebrate our last day here," she explained when he commented on her efforts. "And I wanted to repay your hospitality in some small way." "You didn't have to do that," August said, touched by the gesture. "I wanted to," she replied simply. They ate together at the small table, the mood somehow both relaxed and charged with unspoken awareness. August found himself storing away details of this moment. The way sunlight slanted through the window, the satisfaction on Sophia's face as he complimented her cooking, the comfortable silence that fell between their conversations. "What will you do when you get back to Crooked Creek?" Sophia asked as they finished their meal. "After your adventure as a rescuer of damsels in distress." August smiled at her teasing tone. "Back to work, I suppose. Winter's the quiet season on a ranch, but there's always something that needs doing, mending tack, repairing buildings, keeping the stock fed. Nothing very exciting." "And you're content with that life?" The question seemed casual, but August sensed a deeper meaning behind it. "It suits me," he replied carefully, "or it has up to now." "But," she prompted, catching the qualification in his voice. August hesitated, surprised at his own willingness to voice thoughts he had barely acknowledged to himself. "But sometimes I wonder if there should be more to life than just existing, surviving." Sophia's eyes held his, her expression thoughtful. "I think there should be," she said softly. "For all of us." The moment stretched between them, laden with possibilities neither was quite ready to name. August found himself wanting to reach across the small space that separated them, to touch her hand, her face. Instead, he stood abruptly, clearing their dishes. "I should check our route for tomorrow," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Make sure we can get through to the main trail." Outside, in the bracing cold that burned his lungs with each breath, August tried to regain his equilibrium. This wasn't like him, this awareness, this yearning. He had built his life around self-sufficiency, around not needing anyone. 3 days with Sophia Montrose shouldn't be enough to shake foundations that had stood for 9 years. But as he tramped through the snow, mapping out their best route for the journey to Helena, August couldn't deny that something fundamental had changed. The solitude that had once felt like security now seemed empty. The independence he had prized now felt like isolation. When he returned to the cabin, he found Sophia sitting by the window, a thoughtful expression on her face. She looked up as he entered, and the smile that curved her lips sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. "Did you find us a path?" she asked. "Yes," he replied, stomping snow from his boots. "It won't be easy going, but if we start at first light, we should reach Helena by nightfall." She nodded, her smile fading slightly. "That's good." August hung his coat on the peg by the door, aware of a tension in the small space that hadn't been there before. "Sophia," he began, not entirely sure what he wanted to say. "It's strange, isn't it?" she interrupted, her gaze returning to the window. "How quickly circumstances can change. 3 days ago, I was certain I was going to die alone in that broken wagon. Now I'm about to reach Helena safely, thanks to you." "Anyone would have done the same," August said, the words automatic. "No," she contradicted gently, "they wouldn't have. And even if someone else had found me, it wouldn't have been the same." The implication in her words hung in the air between them. August found himself crossing the small space to stand beside her, drawn by something stronger than his habitual caution. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low. Sophia turned to face him, her blue eyes direct and unguarded. "I mean that these 3 days, as strange as it may sound, have been important to me, getting to know you, talking with you. It's made me see things differently." August swallowed hard, fighting the urge to retreat from the vulnerability in her expression. "We've been thrown together by circumstances," he said, the words feeling hollow even as he spoke them. "Shared danger creates a false sense of connection." "Does it?" she challenged softly. "Or does it simply strip away the pretenses we usually hide behind, allowing us to see each other more clearly than we might in normal circumstances?" Her insight was too close to what August himself had been feeling. He moved away slightly, needing distance to think clearly. "Sophia, tomorrow you'll be in Helena, starting your new life. You'll meet people, make friends. This," he gestured between them, "will fade into a strange memory." "Is that what you want?" The direct question caught him off guard. "For me to be just a memory?" August looked at her, this woman who had somehow slipped past defenses he had maintained for years. The honest answer terrified him, so he deflected. "What I want doesn't matter. We live in different worlds." "Do we?" Sophia stood, moving toward him with a determination that both alarmed and thrilled him. "Or have we both been hiding from the same thing, the risk of caring too much, of being vulnerable again after loss?" Her perception was startling. August felt exposed, as if she had read pages he had kept carefully hidden even from himself. "Sophia." "Tell me I'm wrong," she interrupted. "Tell me you feel nothing beyond the obligation of a rescuer to the person he saved." August couldn't lie, not when she was looking at him with such open honesty. "I can't tell you that," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. "But feelings aren't always enough. The world doesn't change because two people share a connection." "No," she agreed, stepping closer. "The world doesn't change, but people do, August. They change all the time if they're brave enough to allow it." They stood facing each other in the small cabin, the air between them charged with possibility. August felt poised on a precipice, knowing that whatever happened next would alter the course of his carefully ordered existence. "I don't know how to be anything other than what I am," he said finally. "A cowboy with nothing to offer but hard work and harder living." Sophia's smile was gentle, understanding. "I'm not asking you to be anything other than who you are. That's exactly who I've come to." She hesitated, then continued with quiet courage. "To care for." The admission, simple and direct, broke through the last of August's resistance. Without conscious thought, he reached for her, his hand cupping her cheek with a gentleness that belied his calloused palm. Sophia leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "This is madness," he murmured. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes," she replied, "the heart recognizes what the mind cannot yet comprehend." The poetic observation, so at odds with the practical realities of frontier life, nonetheless resonated with the part of August that had always felt apart from his rough surroundings. Without further hesitation, he lowered his head and kissed her. The touch of her lips against his was both a revelation and a homecoming. Sophia responded without hesitation, her arms encircling his neck, drawing him closer. August felt something long dormant awaken within him, a capacity for tenderness he had forgotten he possessed. When they finally separated, August rested his forehead against hers, overwhelmed by the intensity of what had passed between them. "What happens now?" he asked, the question encompassing far more than the immediate future. "Now," Sophia said, her voice steady despite the flush in her cheeks, "we acknowledge that what has happened here isn't something either of us expected, but it may be something we both needed. And tomorrow, when you take me to Helena, we decide if this is an ending or a beginning." Her practicality, even in this moment of emotional upheaval, made August smile. It was one of the things he had come to admire about her, the way she faced reality without flinching, yet maintained hope. "A beginning sounds better than an ending," he admitted. "I think so too," she replied, her smile illuminating her entire face. That night, as they once again shared the narrow bunk for warmth, there was a new dimension to their closeness, an acknowledged connection that went beyond the practical necessity that had first brought them together. August held Sophia against him, her head tucked beneath his chin, and allowed himself to contemplate possibilities he had long since dismissed. Perhaps solitude wasn't the only path to security. Perhaps there was strength to be found in connection, in allowing someone else to matter. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. As Sophia's breathing deepened into sleep, August pressed a gentle kiss to her hair and made a silent promise, not that he would never leave her, for such promises were beyond anyone's power to keep, but that he would be brave enough to try for something more than mere survival. It wasn't much as promises went, but for a man who had spent nearly a decade avoiding attachment of any kind, it was a beginning. The journey to Helena proved every bit as challenging as August had anticipated. They set out at first light, Sophia riding behind August on Renegade, their supplies reduced to what they could carry in his saddlebags. The snow was deep in places, requiring them to dismount and lead the horse through the worst drifts. The temperature remained bitterly cold, though the brilliant sunshine provided some relief. They spoke little during the ride, focusing on the physical demands of the journey, yet there was comfort in their silence, a shared understanding that didn't require words. Occasionally, August would feel Sophia's arms tighten around his waist, a simple gesture that conveyed both reassurance and affection. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the main trail to Helena, which had seen enough traffic since the storm to be somewhat passable. Their pace increased, and August began to recognize landmarks that indicated they were approaching the town. "We're not far now," he said, breaking a silence that had stretched for nearly an hour. "Another hour, maybe less." He felt Sophia nod against his back, but she didn't speak. August understood her reticence. They were approaching the moment when theory would have to become practice, when decisions would have to be made about what exactly had happened between them and what it might mean. As the first buildings of Helena came into view, August felt a tightening in his chest. The town was substantial by Montana standards, a proper settlement with wooden sidewalks, false-fronted stores, and even a few brick buildings among the wooden structures. After days in the isolation of the lined shack, the sight of smoke rising from dozens of chimneys and people moving about the streets was almost jarring. "Where is your uncle's store?" August asked as they entered the outskirts of town. "On Main Street," Sophia replied. "Montrose Mercantile. He said it's across from the assay office." August nodded, guiding Renegade through streets churned to muddy slush by the passage of wagons and horses. Helena had the bustle of a mining town, with men in rough work clothes mingling with those in more prosperous attire. A few women were visible as well, some clearly respectable matrons bundled against the cold, others with painted faces and bright dresses despite the weather. They found the Montrose Mercantile without difficulty, a substantial two-story building with large display windows currently featuring winter goods. August helped Sophia dismount, both of them suddenly awkward now that they had reached their destination. "Well," August said, his hand still on her arm, "here we are." Sophia looked up at the storefront, then back at August, her expression complicated. "Yes," she agreed softly, "here we are." For a moment neither moved. Then the door of the mercantile opened, and a portly man in a shopkeeper's apron emerged, squinting at them. "Sophia," he called, his face breaking into an expression of mingled relief and concern. "My God, child, is that you?" "Uncle Thomas." Sophia turned toward the man, who hurried down the steps to envelop her in a hearty embrace. "We've been frantic with worry," Thomas Montrose exclaimed, holding his niece at arm's length to examine her. "When you didn't arrive with the freight wagon as planned, I feared the worst. I was about to organize a search party when the storm hit." "I'm sorry to have worried you," Sophia said. "There was trouble with the driver, but Mr. Everett found me and brought me safely here." For the first time, Thomas Montrose seemed to notice August, still standing beside Renegade. "Sir, I am in your debt," he said, extending a hand. "Thomas Montrose, you've brought me my only family." August accepted the handshake, noting the man's firm grip and direct gaze. There was a strong resemblance between uncle and niece in the shape of their eyes and the set of their jaws. "August Everett," he replied. "I work at Crooked Creek Ranch, south of here. I was checking fence line when I found Miss Montrose stranded in the storm." "Then Providence was smiling on us both," Thomas declared. "Please, you must come inside. You look half frozen, and I insist on hearing the whole story." August hesitated, glancing at Sophia. Her eyes held a question, an invitation, but the sudden transition from their isolated intimacy to this public reunion had thrown him off balance. He needed time to think, to adjust. "I should see to my horse first," he said, a practical excuse that wasn't entirely untrue. "He's had a hard journey." Of course," Thomas agreed readily. "There's a livery stable just down the street. See to your mount and then come back for a hot meal and proper thanks." "Uncle," Sophia interjected, "Mr. Everett didn't just find me, he saved my life. We were stranded together in a line shack for 3 days during the storm." Thomas looked between them, something in his expression shifting as he processed this information. "All the more reason for us to express our gratitude properly," he said after a moment. "Please, Mr. Everett, promise you'll return after seeing to your horse." Put this way, August could hardly refuse without appearing rude. "I'll be back shortly," he agreed. As he led Renegade toward the livery stable, August felt Sophia's gaze following him. He didn't look back, needing the brief solitude to gather his thoughts. The abrupt transition from the intimate confines of the line shack to the bustle of Helena had left him disoriented. What had seemed clear in isolation now felt complicated by the realities of their different worlds. At the livery stable, he arranged for Renegade to be properly cared for, paying extra to ensure the horse received a good portion of oats and a thorough rub-down. Then, with no further excuse for delay, he made his way back to the Montrose mercantile. A bell jingled as he entered the store, which was warm and well-stocked with everything from tools and dry goods to fabrics and household items. Thomas Montrose was behind the counter, assisting a customer, but he looked up at the sound of the bell. "Mr. Everett, just a moment, please." He completed the transaction, then called toward a doorway at the back of the store. "Sophia, your rescuer has returned." Sophia emerged from what appeared to be a back room or office, and the sight of her caused August's breath to catch. She had changed into a fresh dress of deep blue that complemented her eyes, and her hair was neatly arranged. In these surroundings, she looked every inch the refined Eastern lady, a stark contrast to the woman who had shared his rough accommodations for 3 days. "August," she said, her voice warm with genuine pleasure. "I'm so glad you came back." "I said I would," he replied, suddenly conscious of his worn clothes and trail dust. "I've closed the store for the afternoon," Thomas announced, turning the sign in the window to closed and locking the front door. "This calls for a proper celebration. Please come upstairs to our living quarters. I've had Mrs. Jensen from next door prepare a hot meal." August followed them through the back room and up a narrow staircase to the second floor, which had been converted into comfortable living quarters. A small parlor with well-made furniture opened off a central hallway, and beyond it, August could see a dining room where a table was already set for three. "Please, make yourself comfortable," Thomas urged, gesturing to a chair near the small fireplace that warmed the parlor. "Sophia has told me something of your ordeal, but I'd like to hear the full account, if you don't mind." Over the next hour, as they enjoyed the first proper meal either August or Sophia had eaten in days, they recounted the story of their meeting and subsequent stranding. August was careful to keep his telling factual and restrained, omitting the more personal aspects of their time together. Sophia followed his lead, though occasionally her eyes would meet his with a look that spoke of shared secrets. "It seems we owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid, Mr. Everett," Thomas said when they had finished their account. "If you hadn't found Sophia when you did." "I was just in the right place at the right time," August said, uncomfortable with the older man's gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "I doubt that," Thomas replied soberly. "The frontier can bring out both the best and worst in people. You showed exceptional character in your actions." Sophia's eyes were on August, her expression soft. "Yes," she agreed quietly, "he did." The moment stretched, charged with unspoken meaning, until Thomas cleared his throat. "Will you be staying in Helena for a time, Mr. Everett? I would be happy to arrange accommodations at the hotel." The question brought August back to practical considerations. "I should return to Crooked Creek," he said. "They'll be wondering what happened to me." "Surely not immediately," Sophia interjected, a note of dismay in her voice. "You and your horse both need rest after the journey." August met her gaze, reading the plea there. "Perhaps one night," he conceded, "if it wouldn't be an imposition." "Not at all," Thomas assured him. "Consider it the least we can do in return for your service to our family." As the afternoon wore on, August found himself increasingly aware of the differences between his world and the one Sophia now inhabited. The Montroses, while not wealthy, lived in comfort that was far removed from his Spartan existence at Crooked Creek. Thomas spoke of local society, of church socials and town meetings, describing a community that bore little resemblance to the rough camaraderie of the ranch. Yet he also noted how naturally Sophia fit into this world. She discussed books with her uncle, showed interest in the business of the store, exhibited the manners and conversation of a well-bred lady. It was a side of her August hadn't seen in the line shack, where survival had been their primary concern. As evening approached, Thomas excused himself to check on some business matters downstairs, leaving August and Sophia alone in the parlor. The moment the older man's footsteps faded down the stairs, Sophia moved to sit beside August on the small sofa. "You've been quiet," she observed, her voice gentle. August shrugged, finding it difficult to articulate the doubts that had been growing since their arrival in Helena. "Just tired from the journey," he said. "August," the way she said his name with quiet insistence made it impossible to dissemble. "Please tell me what you're thinking." He looked at her neat appearance, at the setting that so clearly suited her, and felt the distance between them expanding with every moment. "I'm thinking that you belong here," he said honestly. "This is the life you came west for." Sophia's expression softened with understanding. "And you believe there's no place for you in it." The direct question, typical of her straightforward nature, cut through his evasions. "Look at me, Sophia," he said, gesturing to his worn clothes, his rough appearance. "I'm a cowboy. I work with my hands, live in a bunkhouse with other men, own nothing but my horse, my saddle, and what I can carry in my bedroll. Your uncle is being kind because I helped you, but we both know I don't fit in this world." "Is that what matters to you?" she asked, "fitting into a particular world?" "It matters that we're different," August insisted. "What happened between us in that line shack, it was real, I don't deny that, but it happened in isolation, removed from all this." He gestured to their surroundings. "Reality is what we're facing now." Sophia was quiet for a moment, her eyes searching his face. "And you think reality means we must return to our separate lives as if nothing happened? As if we didn't discover something worth pursuing?" August ran a hand through his hair, frustration and longing warring within him. "I think reality means acknowledging the obstacles. You have a life waiting for you here, family, community, a future with prospects. What can I offer that compares to that?" "You're making assumptions," Sophia said, a hint of fire entering her voice. "About what I want, about what matters to me. Did it ever occur to you to simply ask?" Her challenge caught him off guard. "All right," he said, meeting her gaze directly. "What do you want, Sophia?" "I want the chance to find out if what began between us could grow into something lasting," she replied without hesitation. "I want not to let fear of differences or obstacles prevent us from exploring the connection we both felt. I want you to stay in Helena long enough for us to know each other outside of crisis." The simplicity and directness of her answer humbled August. There was no artifice in Sophia, no games or manipulation, just honest expression of what she felt and thought. "And your uncle," August asked, "what would he think of his niece associating with a common cowboy?" "My uncle wants my happiness," Sophia said confidently. "And as for you being common, there has never been anything common about you, August Everett. You may work with your hands, but you have a poet's soul and a gentleman's character. Those qualities aren't determined by occupation or circumstances." Her faith in him, in what they might build together, challenged August's carefully constructed certainties. He had been so sure that the gulf between their worlds was insurmountable that he hadn't considered the possibility of building a bridge across it. "I need to return to Crooked Creek," he said finally. "I have obligations there, work I've committed to." Disappointment flickered across Sophia's face, but she nodded. "I understand." But August continued, making a decision that felt both terrifying and right. "I could come back on my next free days, if you would like that." The smile that illuminated Sophia's face was answer enough, but her words confirmed it. "I would like that very much." Before either could say more, they heard Thomas's steps on the stairs. They moved slightly apart, but not before Sophia reached for August's hand, giving it a quick, reassuring squeeze. "There you are," Thomas said as he entered the parlor. "I've arranged a room for you at the hotel, Mr. Everett." "It's the least we can do." "Thank you," August replied, rising to his feet. "That's very kind, but I should be on my way back to Crooked Creek at first light tomorrow." "So soon?" Thomas looked disappointed. "Well, I suppose your employer will be expecting you. But you must know that you have friends in Helena now. You'll always be welcome here." The sincerity in the older man's voice touched August. "I appreciate that, Mr. Montrose." "Thomas, please," he insisted. "Any man who saved my niece has earned the right to use my Christian name." As August prepared to depart for the hotel, Sophia accompanied him to the door. Thomas, with tactful understanding, busied himself in another room, giving them a moment of privacy. "When will you come back?" Sophia asked softly. "I get 2 days off at the end of each month," August replied, "so 3 weeks from now if the weather allows." "I'll be counting the days," she said, her eyes holding his. August hesitated, aware of Thomas's presence in the next room, but unwilling to leave without some gesture of what had grown between them. With gentle deliberation, he lifted Sophia's hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Until then," he said, his voice low. The blush that rose to her cheeks and the softness in her eyes told him she understood all he wasn't saying aloud. "Until then," she echoed. As August walked to the hotel through the darkening streets of Helena, his thoughts were a tumult of conflicting emotions. The cowboy who had ridden out to check fence line 4 days ago would never have imagined himself here, contemplating a return to town for reasons that had nothing to do with supplies or business. He had spent years convincing himself that solitude was safer than connection, that independence was preferable to vulnerability. Yet in the span of a few days, Sophia Montrose had challenged those beliefs, offering instead the possibility that real strength might lie in having the courage to care, to risk, to open oneself to another. It was a revelation as vast as the Montana sky and as intimate as the touch of her hand in his. And though doubt and fear still whispered their cautions, August found himself looking forward to his return to Helena with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. Perhaps, he thought as he settled into his hotel room, the frontier wasn't just a place of hardship and survival. Perhaps it could also be a place of new beginnings, of possibilities as boundless as the land itself. The return to Crooked Creek Ranch was like stepping back into a familiar but suddenly ill-fitting garment. August rode through the gate late the following evening, having pushed hard to make the journey in a single day. The bunkhouse was lit with the warm glow of coal oil lamps, and he could hear the muffled sounds of conversation and laughter as he approached. "Well, look what the storm blew in," called Pete Simmons, one of the older hands, as August entered. "We figured you'd hold up somewhere till the weather passed." That's right, August confirmed, dropping his saddlebags on his bunk. Found a line shack up by the north boundary. Lucky for you, commented another cowboy, Jim Harris. That was some blow, worst December storm I've seen in years. August nodded noncommittally, not yet ready to share the full story of his absence. The other men, accustomed to his reticence, didn't press for details, instead updating him on the events he'd missed. A few cattle lost to the cold, a collapsed section of the barn roof, the usual challenges of ranch life in winter. The familiarity of it all, the smell of tobacco and leather, the rough camaraderie, the simple concerns of weather and livestock, should have been comforting. Instead, August found himself viewing it all through new eyes, as if his experiences with Sophia had altered some fundamental lens through which he perceived his world. The next morning, he reported to Hank Williams, giving a concise account of how he'd been caught in the storm and taken shelter. He mentioned finding Sophia, explaining that he'd escorted her to Helena once the weather cleared, but kept the personal aspects of their encounter private. "Glad you made it back in one piece," Hank said, his weathered face showing genuine relief. "And good thing you found the woman when you did. That storm would have been the end of her otherwise." "Yes, sir," August agreed. "It was fortunate." Hank studied him for a moment, as if sensing there was more to the story, but didn't pry. "Well, we've got plenty to keep you busy. That north pasture fence still needs checking once the snow melts enough to see it." August nodded, accepting the return to routine. Yet as he went about his duties over the next days, he found his thoughts repeatedly turning to Helena, to a pair of blue eyes, to conversations by firelight, to the promise of return. He had never been a man to count days, to anticipate future moments. Life on the frontier had taught him to focus on the present, on immediate concerns of survival and work. But now he found himself mentally marking the passage of time, calculating the days until his monthly leave. The other hands noticed the change in him, though they couldn't identify its cause. August had always been reserved, competent, but distant. Now he seemed distracted at times, and most surprising of all, occasionally joined in the evening conversations in the bunkhouse instead of retreating to his bunk with a book as was his custom. "You feeling all right, Everett?" Jim asked one evening, after August had contributed to a discussion about the merits of various breeds of cattle, a topic he would normally have ignored. "You been acting different since you got back." August shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. "Just thinking there's no point in keeping to myself all the time," he said, the closest he could come to acknowledging the change Sophia had wrought in him. Jim seemed satisfied with this explanation, but Pete, who had worked at Crooked Creek longer than any of them, gave August a knowing look. "Wouldn't have anything to do with that trip to Helena, would it?" he asked shrewdly. August felt heat rise to his face, confirming Pete's suspicion before he could deny it. "Maybe," he admitted reluctantly. A chorus of good-natured whoops and hollers greeted this acknowledgement. "Everett's got himself a girl," Jim crowed. "Never thought I'd see the day." "It's not like that," August protested, though even to his own ears the denial sounded weak. "Sure it ain't," Pete said with a wink. "That's why you've been watching the calendar like a man waiting for payday." August couldn't help the smile that tugged at his lips. "All right, there's someone I met, but it's complicated." "Ain't it always," Pete said with the wisdom of experience, "but worth it if she's the right one." The conversation moved on to tales of frontier romances, some comic, some tragic, and August found himself listening with new interest. These were men he had worked alongside for years, yet he had never bothered to learn their stories, to understand the lives they had lived before Crooked Creek or the dreams they still harbored. As the days passed, August found himself opening up in small ways, sharing occasional stories of his own past, listening more actively to the experiences of others. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. He was still quieter than most, still preferred solitude for much of his time, but it was a shift that didn't go unnoticed. "Whatever happened in Helena," Hank commented one day as they worked together to repair a section of corral fence, "seems to have done you some good, Everett." August looked up, surprised by the observation. "Sir." "You've always been a good worker," Hank elaborated, "but solitary as a mountain lion. Lately you seem more present. It suits you." The simple approval in his boss's voice affected August more than he would have expected. Hank Williams wasn't a man given to unnecessary conversation, making his comments all the more meaningful. "I met someone," August admitted, the words feeling strange on his tongue. In the storm. A woman from back east, headed to Helena to live with her uncle. I helped her get there safely. Hank nodded as if this confirmed a suspicion, planning to see her again. When I get my leave, August replied. If she's still interested. Hank smiled, a rare expression on his weathered face. Son, I've been watching men come and go on this ranch for 30 years, the look you've been wearing these past weeks. She'll still be interested. The older man's confidence bolstered August's own hope, which had begun to waver as the days stretched on. What if Sophia had reconsidered once he was gone? What if the connection they had felt was indeed just a product of their isolated circumstances, already fading in the reality of her new life in Helena? But alongside these doubts grew a determination August hadn't known he possessed. If there was even a chance that what had begun between them could flourish into something lasting, he owed it to both of them to find out. The man who had spent years avoiding attachment now found himself willing to risk disappointment, even heartbreak, for the possibility of something more. 2 weeks after his return to Crooked Creek, August received an unexpected delivery. One of the hands returning from a supply run to the nearest town brought a letter addressed to him in a neat, feminine hand. Came in on the stage from Helena, the cowboy explained, handing over the envelope with poorly concealed curiosity. Postmaster asked me to bring it out since I was headed this way. August took the letter, ignoring the interested looks from the other men. He waited until evening, when he could read it in the privacy of his bunk, to break the seal. Dear August, I hope this letter finds you well and safely returned to Crooked Creek. Uncle Thomas insisted I write to ensure you arrived without incident, though I suspect he knows my motivations extend beyond mere concern for your safe passage. Helena is proving to be everything I hoped for when I made the decision to come west. Uncle's store is prosperous, and he has already begun training me in its operation. The town itself is lively and growing, with new people arriving daily. There is a small lending library, a ladies' aid society which I have joined, and even occasional musical performances at the hotel. Yet amid these new experiences and acquaintances, I find my thoughts returning often to a certain line shack and the days we spent there. Our conversations by firelight, the way you described the Montana landscape with such quiet appreciation, the feeling of absolute safety despite the storm raging outside, these memories are more vivid to me than the social events I've attended since arriving in Helena. Uncle Thomas speaks of you often and with great respect. He has made it clear that you would be most welcome whenever you are able to visit. I suspect he wishes to demonstrate his gratitude more tangibly than circumstances allowed during your brief stay. As for me, I find myself watching the road from Crooked Creek with perhaps more attention than is entirely proper for a young lady newly established in town. But propriety seems a poor substitute for honesty between two people who have shared the experiences we have. I meant what I said before you left, August. I believe what began between us deserves the chance to grow beyond the extraordinary circumstances that brought us together. If you still feel the same, know that I await your return with eager anticipation. Until then, please take care in your work. Montana winters show no mercy to the careless, as we both well know, with warmest regards. Sophia. P.S. I have enclosed a small token, a bookmark I embroidered during the evenings. Uncle mentioned you had a book with you when you arrived, and I thought perhaps your not good poetry might benefit from a proper marker. August read the letter twice, then carefully extracted the bookmark from the envelope. It was simple but beautifully crafted, with an embroidered border of mountain flowers surrounding his initials. The thoughtfulness of the gift, combined with the warmth and honesty of her letter, settled something within him that had been restless since their parting. He wrote back the next day, his penmanship careful but lacking the graceful flow of Sophia's. In his letter, he described life at Crooked Creek, his daily routines, the characters of the men he worked with. He mentioned the bookmark, now safely nestled in his small volume of Wordsworth, and thanked her for remembering his confession about poetry. He closed with a confirmation that he would indeed be coming to Helena when his leave arrived, and that he too believed their connection deserved exploration beyond the extraordinary circumstances of their meeting. The act of writing to Sophia, of sharing his thoughts and experiences on paper, was unfamiliar but satisfying. August had never been one for correspondence. He had no family to write to, and friendships on the frontier tended to be maintained through periodic meetings rather than letters. But he found he enjoyed crafting his words for Sophia, imagining her reading them, responding to the warmth and intelligence he had come to admire in her. By the time his leave approached, they had exchanged several letters. August learned about Sophia's growing involvement in Helena society, her work in her uncle's store, her discovery of a small group of women who gathered to discuss books and current events. In turn, he shared more of himself than he had with anyone in years, his observations of the changing seasons on the range, his occasional frustrations with ranch life. Even in one letter, a poem he had written about the Montana sky. The day of his departure for Helena dawned clear and cold, with the promise of spring just beginning to soften the winter landscape. August had prepared meticulously for the journey, cleaning his best shirt, polishing his boots, even submitting to a proper haircut from Pete, who had some skill with scissors. "Looking mighty presentable, Everett," Jim commented as August prepared to ride out. "Must be some special lady to get you spruced up like this." "She is," August replied simply, no longer bothered by the good-natured teasing of his fellow hands. The ride to Helena seemed both longer and shorter than he remembered, longer because of his anticipation, shorter because the roads were clear of snow and Renegade was well-rested and eager to travel. As the buildings of Helena came into view, August felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Would Sophia be as he remembered? Would the connection they had formed hold up outside the intense circumstances of their first meeting? He rode directly to the Montrose Mercantile, arriving in the late afternoon. The store was busy with customers, and August hesitated at the entrance, suddenly self-conscious in his clean but obviously well-worn clothes. Then through the window he caught sight of Sophia behind the counter, assisting a customer with fabric selection. The sight of her, poised, smiling, her chestnut hair neatly arranged beneath a small cap, sent a jolt of recognition through him. Before he could enter, the door opened and Thomas Montrose emerged, apparently on his way to another errand. His face broke into a wide smile at the sight of August. "Mr. Everett, or August, as I must insist on calling you. You've arrived at last. Sophia will be delighted." He clasped August's hand in a warm handshake, then glanced over his shoulder through the store window. "I was just stepping out to the bank, but please go in. Sophia has been watching the road these past 2 days." August nodded, grateful for the older man's welcome and his tacit approval of August's visit. "Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate your hospitality." "Nonsense," Thomas replied with a dismissive wave. "You're practically family after what you did for Sophia. Now go on in before my niece accuses me of keeping you to myself." With that encouragement, August tied Renegade to the hitching post and entered the store. The bell above the door jingled, causing several customers to glance his way. But August's attention was fixed on Sophia, who had looked up at the sound. For a moment, they simply gazed at each other across the store. Then Sophia excused herself from the customer she had been helping and made her way toward him, her face alight with a smile that erased any doubts August might have harbored. "You're here," she said simply when she reached him. "I said I would be," he replied, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite contain. "Yes, you did." Her eyes searched his face, as if reacquainting herself with every feature. "And you always keep your promises, don't you, August Everett?" "I try to," he said, wishing they were somewhere private rather than in a store filled with curious onlookers. Sophia seemed to read his discomfort. "I have to finish with Mrs. Pearson," she said, gesturing to the customer she had been assisting. "But Uncle was just leaving for the bank, so we'll have some privacy soon. Can you wait?" "Of course," August assured her. "I'm not going anywhere." The double meaning of his words wasn't lost on Sophia, whose smile deepened before she returned to her customer. August moved to a less conspicuous position near the back of the store, observing as Sophia efficiently completed the sale, her manner professional but warm. When the last customer had departed and Thomas had not yet returned, Sophia turned the sign in the window to closed and locked the front door. Then she crossed to where August stood, no longer constrained by the presence of others. "I've been counting the days," she admitted, her voice soft, "wondering if what we felt in that line shack would still be there when we met again." "And," August asked, his heart beating faster as she stepped closer. "And now I have my answer," she replied, reaching up to touch his face with gentle fingers. "It's still there, stronger even." August caught her hand in his, pressing it against his cheek. For me too, he said simply. The admission, plain and unadorned, seemed to be what Sophia had been waiting for. Her face softened with relief and joy. Then I'm very glad you came back, August Everett. So am I, he replied, and before he could think better of it, he lowered his head and kissed her. Unlike their first kiss, tentative and questioning in the lined shack, this one was confident, an affirmation rather than an exploration. Sophia responded with equal certainty, her arms encircling his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, August rested his forehead against hers. I should probably apologize for that, he murmured, taking liberties in your uncle's store. Sophia laughed, the sound bright with happiness. You'll find my uncle is surprisingly broad-minded about certain matters, she said, particularly when they concern the happiness of his only niece. As if summoned by their conversation, the back door opened, and Thomas Montrose reappeared. He took in their close proximity with a raised eyebrow but no evident disapproval. I see our guest has arrived, he observed mildly, and received a proper welcome, I trust. Sophia blushed but didn't move away from August. Yes, uncle, August has just arrived from Crooked Creek. Excellent timing, Thomas declared. Mrs. Jensen has prepared a special dinner in anticipation of your visit, August. I hope you're hungry after your journey. Yes, sir, August replied, relieved at the older man's apparent acceptance of his presence. Very much so. Good, good. Sophia, why don't you show August upstairs while I finish closing up down here? I'll join you shortly. As they climbed the stairs to the living quarters above the store, Sophia slipped her hand into August's, the simple gesture conveying a sense of rightness that settled over him like a familiar blanket. Your uncle seems accepting, August observed, still slightly surprised by Thomas's relaxed attitude toward his niece's evident attachment to a common cowboy. Sophia smiled, squeezing his hand. I told you he values my happiness above all else. Besides, he's formed a rather high opinion of you between your rescue of me and your letters. My letters? August stopped on the landing, surprised. You showed him my letters. Not all of them, Sophia assured him with a mischievous smile. But I may have shared portions that I thought would help him understand why you matter to me. The idea that Sophia had been actively advocating for him, preparing her uncle to accept his presence in her life, touched August deeply. It was further evidence of the determination and clarity of purpose that had drawn him to her from the beginning. The evening that followed was one of the most pleasant in August's memory. Dinner with Sophia and her uncle was a relaxed affair, filled with good food, engaging conversation, and a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the parlor grate. Thomas proved to be a thoughtful host, drawing August out on topics from ranch management to literature, creating space for Sophia to participate without dominating the conversation. After dinner, as they sat in the parlor with cups of coffee, Thomas surprised August with a direct question that cut to the heart of the matter. What are your intentions toward my niece, August? Sophia made a small sound of protest, but Thomas held up a hand. No, my dear, it's a fair question. August seems like a man who appreciates directness. August nodded, acknowledging the accuracy of this assessment. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, aware that his answer would shape not just this evening but potentially the course of his future. Sir, I came to Helena because in the time I spent with Sophia during the storm, I discovered something I didn't know I was missing, he began, his voice steady despite the gravity of what he was expressing. A connection that made me question the solitary path I've been walking for years. I can't offer wealth or position. What I have is honest work, strong hands, and a heart that has never been given before but finds itself drawn to your niece in a way I can't explain but won't deny. He paused, looking at Sophia, whose eyes were bright with emotion. My intention is to court her properly, if she and you permit it, to see if what began in extraordinary circumstances can grow into something lasting under ordinary ones. Thomas nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. And how do you propose to court my niece when you live at Crooked Creek, and she here in Helena? It was a practical question that August had been considering during the weeks of their separation. For now, I'll come to Helena when I can, on my leave days, but I've been thinking about the future too. Crooked Creek isn't the only ranch in Montana. There's work closer to Helena, if things between Sophia and me progress as I hope they might. The willingness to consider relocation, to prioritize proximity to Sophia over his established position at Crooked Creek, was a significant concession for a man who had spent years avoiding attachment of any kind. The smile that spread across Sophia's face told August she understood exactly what his words represented. A sensible approach, Thomas approved, and refreshingly honest. Sophia, do you have anything to add to this discussion of your future? Sophia's gaze never left August's face as she replied to her uncle. Only that I believe August Everett is the kind of man worth waiting for, worth accommodating, and worth building a life with, should we both determine that's what we want. The simple declaration, made without embarrassment or hesitation, filled August with a warmth that spread through his entire being. This was what had drawn him back to Helena, this forthright honesty, this courage to name feelings without artifice or games. Thomas looked between them, his expression softening. Well then, it seems we have an understanding. August, you are welcome in this home whenever you can make the journey from Crooked Creek. And should you decide to seek work closer to Helena, I would be happy to help in whatever way I can. Thank you, sir, August replied, moved by the older man's acceptance and support. Now, Thomas said, rising from his chair, I find myself quite tired after the day's work. I believe I'll retire early and leave you young people to your own devices. Within reason, of course, he added with a twinkle in his eye that belied the stern addendum. After Thomas had departed, Sophia moved to sit beside August on the small sofa. Well, she said, a smile playing at her lips, that went rather well, don't you think? Better than I had any right to expect, August admitted. Your uncle is a remarkable man. He is, Sophia agreed. But then he recognizes the same quality in you. August shook his head slightly, still not entirely comfortable with praise. I'm just a cowboy who happened to be in the right place at the right time. You're far more than that, Sophia contradicted gently, and I think you know it even if you won't admit it. She reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. The simple touch grounded August, making the moment, sitting in a comfortable parlor in Helena with this remarkable woman, feel real in a way that his solitary imaginings had not. I meant what I said to your uncle, he told her, his voice low and serious, about looking for work closer to Helena if things between us, if you. I know you did, Sophia replied, squeezing his hand. And I meant what I said too. You're worth waiting for, August Everett, but I won't pretend I wouldn't be happy to have you closer than a 2-day ride away. The honesty in her voice, the warmth in her eyes, dissolved the last of August's reservations. Here was a woman who saw him clearly and valued what she saw, who matched his directness with her own, who challenged his solitude not by demanding he change, but by offering an alternative that suddenly seemed infinitely more appealing. Then I'll start looking, he promised. There are several ranches between here and Crooked Creek. One of them might need an experienced hand. Sophia's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. I would like that very much. They spent the remainder of the evening talking, planning, sharing the thoughts and feelings that had occupied them during their weeks apart. When it came time for August to depart for his hotel room, their parting at the door held the sweet anticipation of future meetings rather than the uncertainty that had marked their previous farewell. Until tomorrow, August said, pressing a gentle kiss to Sophia's hand. Tomorrow, she agreed, her eyes reflecting the promise of more tomorrows beyond that one. As August walked to his hotel through the quiet streets of Helena, he marveled at the transformation of his circumstances in just a few short weeks. From a solitary rider caught in a blizzard to a man with prospects, with connections, with the possibility of a future that included companionship rather than isolation. It was as if Sophia had not just saved herself when she survived that storm, but had saved him as well, from a lifetime of self-imposed loneliness. The next day established a pattern that would define August's visits to Helena in the coming months. He spent the morning helping in the store, using his strength to move heavy inventory and his height to reach high shelves, learning the basics of the mercantile business from Thomas. In the afternoon, he and Sophia would walk through town, or, if the weather permitted, venture to the outskirts where the buildings gave way to the natural beauty of the Montana landscape. During these walks, they continued to share their histories, their hopes, their views on everything from politics to literature to the future of the frontier. August found himself opening up more with each conversation, revealing aspects of himself he had kept hidden even from those he had worked alongside for years. I never understood why my parents stayed in Missouri after the war, he confided as they sat on a fallen log overlooking a small stream on the edge of town. The farm was struggling. Neighbors who had fought on opposite sides could barely speak to each other, and there was so much bitterness. My father talked about going west, but they never did. After they died, there didn't seem to be anything keeping me there. So you came to Montana, Sophia said, her hand resting comfortably in his. Eventually. Tried my hand at a few things first, freight driving, mining for a season, even worked on a riverboat for a while. But none of it felt right until I found ranch work. There's something about working with horses, about being out on the range with nothing but sky above you, that suits me. Sophia listened attentively, her expression thoughtful. Do you think you could be happy doing anything else? Working in a town, perhaps. The question struck at the heart of the decision August was contemplating, whether he could give up the life he had known to be closer to Sophia. I don't know, he admitted honestly. I've never tried. But I'm willing to find out if that's what it takes. I wouldn't want you to be unhappy, Sophia said, concern evident in her voice. The life you've described, the freedom of it, that's part of who you are. It has been, August agreed, touched by her understanding. But people change, Sophia. The man who rode fence line that day in December isn't the same man sitting here with you now. And it's not just because of the storm or finding you. It's because you made me see that there might be more to life than just surviving it alone. Sophia's eyes softened at his words. I believe there is, she said quietly, for both of us. On his final evening in Helena, Thomas invited several friends to dinner, a small gathering that served as an informal introduction of August to Helena society. Among the guests were the local banker and his wife, the editor of the territorial newspaper, and the owner of the hotel where August was staying. August had been apprehensive about the gathering, conscious of his rough edges in such company. But Sophia, sensing his discomfort, stayed close by his side, smoothly integrating him into conversations and highlighting his knowledge of ranching and the territory when appropriate topics arose. To August's surprise, he found himself engaging comfortably with Thomas's friends. The banker was interested in his observations about cattle prices and market trends. The newspaper editor was eager to hear first-hand accounts of life on isolated ranches during the winter months. Even the hotel owner, a somewhat pompous man August had expected to dismiss him, showed respect when August demonstrated detailed knowledge of the best routes between various settlements in the territory. You've made quite an impression, Sophia murmured as they stood slightly apart from the others after dinner. Mr. Davis was just telling Uncle Thomas that you have a better grasp of territorial geography than most men who have lived here twice as long. August smiled, feeling more at ease than he had expected in such surroundings. Just knowledge picked up along the way, nothing special. It is special, Sophia insisted. You underestimate yourself, August. You have qualities these people respect: practical knowledge, direct speech, integrity. Those things matter more out here than they might in Boston drawing rooms. Her faith in him, her clear-eyed assessment of his strengths, continued to surprise and move August. He had spent so many years defining himself by what he wasn't, not educated, not wealthy, not from a prominent family, that he had failed to recognize the value of what he was. As the evening drew to a close and the guests prepared to depart, the banker, William Crawford, approached August with an unexpected proposition. Everett, Thomas tells me you might be looking for work closer to Helena, he said, his manner businesslike but friendly. As it happens, I've recently acquired a small ranch about 10 miles east of town. Previous owner couldn't make the payments. I need someone knowledgeable to assess the property and potentially manage it. Might you be interested? The offer caught August entirely off guard. He glanced at Thomas, who gave a small nod of encouragement, and at Sophia, whose face remained carefully neutral despite the hope that flashed briefly in her eyes. I'd certainly be willing to take a look, August replied, not wanting to commit without seeing the property but equally unwilling to dismiss the opportunity outright. When did you have in mind? Next time you're in Helena would be fine, Crawford said. No rush, but I'd appreciate a knowledgeable opinion before spring roundup season. I'll be back in a month, August told him. I'd be happy to ride out and assess the place then. Excellent, Crawford seemed genuinely pleased. We'll discuss terms at that time, assuming you find the property suitable. After the guests had departed, August found himself alone with Sophia in the parlor, Thomas having tactfully excused himself to review some business papers in his office. "Did you know about Crawford's offer?" August asked, suspecting some behind-the-scenes arrangement. Sophia shook her head. "Not specifically, no, but Uncle Thomas has been, let's say, mentioning your name in certain circles. He believes in you, August, as do I." The simple statement of faith humbled August. "It would mean leaving Crooked Creek," he said, thinking aloud. "Hank's been good to me." "He would understand," Sophia said gently. "From what you've told me of him, he seems like a man who values happiness over loyalty for its own sake." August nodded, acknowledging the truth in her assessment. "It's just a possibility at this point," he cautioned, not wanting to build expectations that might not be fulfilled. "I haven't seen the property, don't know what condition it's in." "Of course," Sophia agreed. "But it's a start, isn't it? A direction." "Yes," August said, realizing the truth of her observation. "It is that." The following morning, as August prepared for his return journey to Crooked Creek, Sophia walked with him to the livery stable where Renegade had been boarded during his visit. The crisp morning air held a hint of the spring to come, and Helena was beginning to stir with the day's activities. "It's easier this time," Sophia observed as they walked side by side, not quite touching but acutely aware of each other's presence. "Saying goodbye." "Because we know it's not for long," August replied, understanding what she meant. "And because we've established something real beyond those first days in the storm." Sophia nodded, her expression both tender and determined. "Write to me," she said. "Every week if you can. I want to know everything, the daily work, the people, your thoughts." "I will," August promised. "And you'll do the same." "Of course," she smiled up at him, the morning sunlight catching in her chestnut hair. "Though I warn you, my letters may contain tedious details of fabric shipments and accounts receivable. Uncle is determined to train me in every aspect of the business." "I want to know it all," August assured her, finding that he truly did want to understand every part of her life, even the mundane details that made up her days. At the livery stable, as Renegade was brought out saddled and ready for the journey, August faced Sophia for their parting. Despite the public setting, he drew her slightly apart, into the shadow of the stable entrance. "Thank you," he said simply, "for making me see what I've been missing all these years." "And what is that?" Sophia asked, her voice soft but steady. "Connection," August replied, "the courage to care. The possibility of a future that includes more than just survival." Sophia's eyes shone with emotion as she reached up to touch his face. "Those things have always been within you, August. You just needed a reason to recognize them." The simple truth of her observation struck August with the force of revelation. Perhaps he had always possessed the capacity for connection, for love, but had buried it beneath layers of self-protection after losing his parents, after years of frontier hardship. "I'll be back in a month," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "Sooner if I can manage it." "I'll be here," Sophia promised, waiting. Their kiss was brief but filled with promise, of letters to be exchanged, of futures to be planned, of a connection that had begun in the unlikeliest of circumstances, but had taken root and flourished despite the odds. As August mounted Renegade and turned the horse toward the road that would take him back to Crooked Creek, he carried with him more than memories of his days in Helena. He carried a new sense of purpose, a direction that had been lacking in his life for longer than he cared to admit. The solitary rider who had once valued independence above all else now found himself eagerly anticipating his return, not just to Sophia, though she was central to his thoughts, but to the community that had begun to form around her. Thomas, with his practical wisdom and unexpected acceptance. The townspeople who had welcomed him without prejudice. Even Crawford, with his unexpected offer of work closer to Helena. For the first time in years, August Everett rode with his face turned not just toward his destination, but toward his future. A future that now held possibilities he had never dared to imagine before a winter storm had brought an Eastern woman into his path and changed the course of his life forever. The return to Crooked Creek brought not the sense of relief August might once have expected, but rather an awareness of transition. The ranch, the bunkhouse, the familiar routines, they no longer felt like his entire world, but rather a temporary station on a journey that was taking him somewhere else entirely. He reported to Hank Williams immediately upon his arrival, finding the ranch owner in the barn inspecting a new foal. Welcome back, Everett, Hank said, glancing up from his examination of the gangly-legged colt. Trip go well? Yes, sir, August replied. Better than expected, actually. Something in his tone must have alerted Hank to the significance of the statement, for the older man straightened and gave August his full attention. That right. Care to elaborate? August hesitated only briefly. Hank had been a fair employer and in his own gruff way, something of a mentor. He deserved honesty. I may have an opportunity for work closer to Helena, August explained. Nothing definite yet, but a possibility I need to explore. Hank nodded slowly, his weathered face revealing neither surprise nor displeasure. This about that woman you rescued? Partly, August acknowledged, but also about finding a place that might be more mine than just a bunk in someone else's operation. A smile creased Hank's features, unexpected and genuine. About time, he said cryptically. Been waiting for you to figure that out. Sir, August was confused by the response. You're a good hand, Everett, one of the best I've had, but you've never seemed settled here, not really. Always kept yourself apart like you were just passing through even after 3 years. Hank gestured around the barn. This life suits some men fine, others need something more. Sounds like you might be one of the latter. The perception in the older man's assessment caught August off guard. He had thought his reserved nature had been taken simply as the natural taciturnity of a cowboy, not as an indication of his unsettled spirit. I haven't made any decisions yet, August clarified. Need to see the property, discuss terms. Of course, Hank agreed, but if it works out, you'll go with my blessing. Man ought to follow his heart when he gets the chance. Too many out here never get that opportunity. There was something in Hank's voice that suggested personal experience, a path not taken or a chance missed, but August knew better than to pry. Instead, he simply nodded his thanks for the understanding. Still got work to do here in the meantime, he said, turning the conversation back to immediate concerns. That you do, Hank confirmed. South pasture fence needs righting now that the snow's mostly gone, and we've got calving starting in earnest. Extra hands needed for night watch. August accepted these assignments with the same quiet efficiency he had always shown, but as he went about his duties over the next weeks, there was a difference in his approach. He worked with the consciousness of a man preparing to hand over responsibilities, ensuring that everything was in good order for whoever might take his place. The other hands noticed the change, particularly after August shared his potential plans with those he was closest to. Their reactions ranged from genuine congratulations to good-natured ribbing about being lassoed by a city gal. But underlying all was a sense of respect for a man making decisions about his own future. Never figured you for settling down, Everett, Pete commented one evening as they sat on the bunkhouse steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Always seemed like the lone wolf type. August smiled slightly, recognizing the truth in the observation. Guess I surprised myself as much as anyone. She must be something special, this Helena lady of yours, Pete mused, lighting his pipe. She is, August agreed simply, but it's not just her, I don't know how to explain it. Don't have to, Pete said, drawing on his pipe thoughtfully. Some things a man just knows deep down. When it's time for a change, when he's found where he belongs, no shame in that. The older cowboy's understanding touched August more than he would have expected. These men, with whom he had shared work and hardship but little of his personal thoughts or feelings, seemed to grasp the significance of his potential move without requiring lengthy explanations. As promised, August wrote to Sophia every week, sometimes more often when circumstances permitted. Her letters in return became the anchors of his days, points of connection to the future he was beginning to envision for himself. She wrote of her growing responsibilities at the store, of social events in Helena, of conversations with her uncle about August and the possibility of his relocation. Thomas Montrose is thoroughly invested in your potential move to Helena, she wrote in one letter. He speaks of you to anyone who will listen, describing you as a man of exceptional character and ability. I believe he has appointed himself your unofficial advocate among the business community here. The thought of the older man's support warmed August. He had never had a champion before, someone who believed in his potential and was willing to speak on his behalf. It was yet another unexpected gift that had come from that fateful winter storm. As the weeks passed and spring established itself more firmly across the landscape, August found himself counting down the days until his next visit to Helena. This time, he had arranged with Hank for 3 days instead of the usual 2, using some accumulated leave time to extend his stay. The extra day would allow him to properly assess Crawford's property without rushing. The journey to Helena was becoming familiar now, landmarks taking on personal significance beyond their practical function as navigation aids. August found himself noting changes in the landscape from his previous trips, the spring flowers beginning to appear in sheltered valleys, the new growth on trees, the signs of life returning after the long winter. When he arrived in Helena, Sophia was waiting at the store, watching for his approach. The way her face lit up at the sight of him dispelled any lingering doubts August might have harbored about the strength of their connection. This was real, what was growing between them, not a product of unusual circumstances or proximity, but something deeper and more lasting. "You made good time," she observed after their greeting, which was warmer and less restrained than their previous reunions. "Easier traveling now that the snow's gone," August replied, still holding her hands in his. "And I had motivation to hurry." The smile that curved her lips made the long journey worth every mile. "Mr. Crawford has been asking after you," she told him as they walked toward the stairs leading to the living quarters. "He's eager to show you the property tomorrow." "I'm curious to see it," August admitted, "though I'm trying not to get my hopes too high. Properties that come into bank ownership are often in poor condition." "Uncle says this one might be different," Sophia said, leading the way upstairs. The previous owner was elderly, a widower with no children nearby. He maintained the place well but simply couldn't manage it alone anymore. Thomas Montrose greeted August with genuine warmth, confirming what Sophia had written about the older man's advocacy on his behalf. "Crawford's been talking of nothing else but showing you this ranch," Thomas told him over dinner. "I think he sees an opportunity to turn a bank problem into a profitable solution." "Meaning?" August asked, intrigued by the implication. "The bank doesn't want to be in the ranching business," Thomas explained. "They want their money back, but a property sitting empty deteriorates quickly, especially out here. If Crawford can find someone competent to manage it, perhaps eventually buy it, that's far better for his ledgers than letting it sit vacant." August nodded, understanding the business logic. "Still, a manager isn't an owner. I'd be working for Crawford, not myself." "Initially, yes," Thomas agreed. "But William is a practical man. If the arrangement proves profitable, I suspect he'd be open to discussing a purchase agreement over time." Many businesses out here began exactly that way, a capable man proving himself before becoming an owner. The prospect was both exhilarating and daunting. August had never considered ownership, had never accumulated the capital necessary for such an enterprise. But the idea of having something truly his own, something he could build and perhaps someday pass on, held an appeal he couldn't deny. "One step at a time," Sophia cautioned, sensing perhaps the direction of his thoughts. "First, you need to see if the property suits your needs and abilities." August smiled at her practical approach. "You're right, as usual," he acknowledged. "No point getting ahead of ourselves." The following morning, August rode out with William Crawford to inspect the property. Located about 10 miles east of Helena, the ranch was smaller than Crooked Creek, but substantial enough to be viable, approximately 300 acres of good grazing land, with a year-round creek providing reliable water. The buildings consisted of a modest but solid log house, a barn in good repair, and various outbuildings for equipment and supplies. As Thomas had suggested, the property showed signs of careful maintenance despite recent vacancy. Fences were generally sound, pastures well managed, and the living quarters clean and functional if somewhat Spartan. Previous owner was Jacob Miller, Crawford explained as they walked the property. Came out from Pennsylvania in the 50s, built this place up from nothing. Good cattleman by all accounts, but he took ill last fall, couldn't keep up with the work. His daughter took him back east, tried to sell the place outright but couldn't find a buyer quickly enough to avoid the bank note coming due. August nodded, understanding the common story. Many small ranches faced similar fates when owners aged or died without family willing to continue the operation. "How many head did he run?" he asked, focusing on practical matters. "About 60 breeding cows at peak," Crawford replied. "Plus calves and a few bulls, had a good reputation for quality stock." Most were sold off when he left, but there's a small herd of about 20 head still on the property. Neighbors been checking on them as a favor, but they need proper management. The numbers made sense for a property this size. Not enough to make a man wealthy, but sufficient to provide a decent living with proper management. August mentally calculated potential growth, costs, and returns as they continued their inspection. By the time they returned to the main house, August had formed a clear picture of what the property offered and what it would require. It was a viable operation, neither a gold mine nor a money pit, exactly the kind of opportunity that might allow a man of limited means but strong abilities to establish himself. "What are your thoughts?" Crawford asked as they sat on the porch, sharing coffee from a pot August had brewed in the ranch's kitchen. "It's a solid property," August replied honestly. "Needs work, but nothing unreasonable. Good water, good grass, manageable size for one man with occasional hired help during busy seasons." Crawford nodded, seeming pleased with the assessment. "And would you be interested in managing it?" "Terms would be a monthly salary plus a percentage of calf sales. Housing provided, of course." "I would," August confirmed, making the decision that had been forming throughout the day. "Assuming we can agree on those terms." "I believe we can," Crawford said with satisfaction. "I'm not looking to squeeze profits at the expense of proper management. Better for all concerned if the ranch thrives." They discussed specifics, salary, responsibilities, expectations, with a directness that August appreciated. Crawford proved to be a straightforward businessman, interested in practical results rather than overseeing daily operations. "When could you start?" Crawford asked as they prepared to ride back to Helena. August considered the question carefully. He owed Hank a proper notice, and there would be preparations needed for the move. 3 weeks, he replied. "Need to finish out the month at Crooked Creek, give proper notice, collect my things." "Fair enough," Crawford agreed. "Properties waited this long, another few weeks won't matter. I'll have the papers drawn up for your return." As they rode back toward Helena, August felt a curious mixture of excitement and apprehension. The decision, now made, represented the most significant change in his life since he had left Missouri as a young man. He was committing not just to a new job, but to a new direction, one that potentially included putting down roots for the first time in nearly a decade. When they reached Helena, Crawford left August at the Montrose Mercantile with a handshake that sealed their verbal agreement. August entered the store to find Sophia assisting a customer, her expression professional but her eyes lighting with question when she saw him. He gave a small nod, a private confirmation that she interpreted correctly, her smile widening momentarily before she returned her attention to her customer. That evening, as they sat in the parlor with Thomas, August recounted his inspection of the property and the agreement he had reached with Crawford. "It's a good opportunity," Thomas assessed, nodding with approval. "Miller's place has been well regarded in the area. With proper management, it could be profitable quite quickly." "That's my hope," August agreed. "It's smaller than Crooked Creek but more manageable for one man, and the proximity to Helena is," he glanced at Sophia, not needing to complete the thought. "A significant advantage," Thomas finished for him, his eyes twinkling. "For business purposes, of course. Access to markets, supplies, banking facilities." Sophia laughed softly at her uncle's transparent attempt at discretion. "I think we're all aware of the primary advantage, Uncle," she said, reaching for August's hand. "No need to pretend otherwise." Thomas's expression softened as he looked between them. "No, I suppose not," he agreed. "It does an old man's heart good to see his niece so happy, August. And to know that the man responsible intends to be within visiting distance, rather than a 2-day ride away." The simple acknowledgement of what was developing between August and Sophia, not just by Thomas, but now by Crawford and others in Helena, made their connection feel increasingly real and established. They were no longer just two people thrown together by a winter storm, but a recognized couple with a future that others could see and accept. The remainder of August's visit passed in a blend of practical planning and precious moments with Sophia. They walked together through Helena, stopping occasionally to interact with townspeople who now greeted August by name. They spent an afternoon with a picnic by the same stream where they had talked during his previous visit, now flowing freely with spring runoff. They attended Sunday services at the small church where Sophia had become a regular congregant, August feeling self-conscious but welcomed by the community. Throughout it all, August found himself adjusting to the idea of belonging, not just to Sophia, but to a community, to a place that might become home in the truest sense of the word. It was a novel experience for a man who had spent years defining himself by his independence and detachment. On his final evening in Helena, as they sat together in the parlor after Thomas had tactfully retired early, Sophia broached a subject they had danced around but not directly addressed. "August," she began, her voice soft but determined, "when you return to Helena permanently, we need to discuss our future more specifically." Her directness, as always, both challenged and reassured him. There was no coyness in Sophia, no game-playing or manipulation. She named what needed naming, addressed what required addressing. "Yes," he agreed, taking her hand in his. "We do. I won't pretend not to know my own mind," she continued, meeting his gaze steadily. "What began between us in that line shack has only grown stronger with each letter, each visit. I know what I feel, what I want." "And what is that?" August asked, though he believed he knew the answer. "A life with you," she replied simply. "Not immediately, perhaps. We should have time to know each other in ordinary circumstances, to be certain. But eventually I want us to build something together, a home, a family, a future." The clarity of her vision, the courage of her declaration, humbled August. This woman who had faced the frontier's dangers, who had rebuilt her life after loss, who had chosen uncertainty over a safe but loveless future, now offered him the most precious gift imaginable, her heart freely given. "I want that too," he said, his voice rough with emotion he no longer tried to conceal. "More than I've ever wanted anything. But Sophia, you should know, I have almost nothing to offer except hard work and a promise to do everything in my power to make you happy." Sophia's smile was luminous in the lamplight. "That's more than many women ever receive, August. And it's precisely what I want, not wealth or position, but a man whose word means something, whose heart is true, whose hands are strong enough to build and gentle enough to love." The poetry in her description moved August deeply. Without hesitation, he drew her into his arms, kissing her with all the emotion he had once been so careful to contain. Sophia responded with equal fervor, her arms encircling his neck, her body fitting against his as if designed to complement his greater height and breadth. When they finally separated, August kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "When I return," he promised, "we'll make our intentions formal, if you're certain that's what you want." "I am certain," she assured him, her voice steady despite the flush in her cheeks. "I have been since the moment you found me in that storm." The conviction in her words sealed something within August, a certainty that had been growing since their first days together. This woman, intelligent, courageous, forthright, was the partner he had never known to seek, the companion who could transform his solitary existence into something richer and more meaningful than he had dared to imagine. "3 weeks," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "and then I'll be back for good." "I'll be counting the days," Sophia replied, her smile holding all the promise of the future they had begun to envision together. The return to Crooked Creek for what August now knew would be his final weeks carried a bittersweet quality. The familiar landscape, the routines he had followed for 3 years, the men he had worked alongside, all were now viewed through the lens of imminent departure. Things he had taken for granted suddenly held new significance as aspects of a life he was choosing to leave behind. He reported to Hank Williams immediately upon his arrival, finding the ranch owner in his small office reviewing account books. August detailed his inspection of the Miller property and the arrangement he had reached with Crawford, feeling it important that Hank understand this was not an impulsive decision, but a carefully considered opportunity. "Sounds like a good fit," Hank said when August had finished his explanation. "Miller ran a tight operation from what I've heard, small but well managed." "That's my assessment too," August agreed. "I'd like to give proper notice if that's acceptable. 3 weeks to finish out the month and help with the transition." Hank nodded, closing his account book. "Appreciate that, Everett. Good hands aren't easy to replace, especially ones who know the territory like you do." He paused, studying August with a shrewd gaze. "This about more than just the ranch opportunity, I take it." August saw no reason to dissemble. "Yes," he admitted, "the lady I mentioned, Sophia, being closer to Helena means being closer to her." A smile creased Hank's weathered features. "Thought as much. Well, can't fault a man for following his heart. Lord knows the frontier's a harsh enough place without denying yourself a chance at happiness when it comes along. The understanding in the older man's response confirmed August's long-held respect for his employer. Hank Williams might be rough-edged and taciturn, but there was wisdom in him, a recognition of what truly mattered that went beyond cattle and profit margins. "Thank you," August said simply, "for understanding. And for everything these past 3 years." Hank waved away the gratitude with a gruff gesture. "You've earned your keep and then some, Everett. I'd rather see you move on to something better than stay out of some misplaced sense of loyalty. Man's got to build his own future in this country." The conversation with Hank set the tone for August's final weeks at Crooked Creek. There was no awkwardness, no sense of abandonment or betrayal, just the practical acknowledgement that life on the frontier often involved movement, change, the pursuit of opportunity. The other hands received the news of August's departure with a mixture of good-natured ribbing and genuine congratulations. Most understood implicitly that the chance to manage a property of his own, even if technically employed by a bank, represented a step up from the life of a hired hand. The addition of a woman worth relocating for only added to their perception of August's good fortune. "You'll have to bring her out for a visit sometime," Pete suggested one evening as they sat around the bunkhouse after dinner. "Let us see this Helena lady who managed to rope the most standoffish cowboy in Montana territory." August smiled at the characterization, no longer bothered by such teasing. "Maybe I will," he replied, surprising himself with the response, "once we're settled." The casual reference to a shared future, spoken aloud among men who had once known only his most reserved self, marked how far August had come since that fateful December day. The man who had once held himself apart from even the most basic connections now found himself planning a life that included not just Sophia, but a wider community, a network of relationships that extended beyond mere professional necessity. As his departure date approached, August spent his evenings sorting through his few possessions, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. It was a revealing exercise, forcing him to acknowledge how little he had accumulated during his years of wandering. His worldly goods consisted primarily of practical items, clothing, tools, his saddle and tack, with only a few personal touches. The volume of Wordsworth poetry, now marked with Sophia's embroidered bookmark. A small photograph of his parents, faded but preserved, a pocket watch that had been his father's, its silver case worn smooth by generations of handling. Yet alongside this reminder of how sparsely he had lived came a new awareness, that the true measure of a life wasn't found in possessions but in connections. August's life had been materially simple but emotionally austere as well. Now, as he prepared to depart Crooked Creek, he was richer in the ways that mattered most. A woman who loved him, friends who wished him well, a community beginning to accept him as one of their own. The day before his scheduled departure, August rode out one last time to check a section of fence he had maintained throughout his time at Crooked Creek. It was an unnecessary task, one that could have been left for his replacement, but he felt a need for this final circuit, this completion of a cycle that had begun 3 years earlier. As he rode, August found his thoughts turning not to the past but to the future, to the Miller Ranch and the work that awaited him there, to Helena and the community he would now be part of, to Sophia and the life they might build together. Where once he had seen the vast Montana landscape as a place of isolation, of survival against harsh elements, he now perceived it as a setting for possibility, for growth, for a kind of belonging he had never thought to seek. That evening, the men of Crooked Creek organized an impromptu farewell gathering. Someone produced a bottle of whiskey, carefully hoarded for special occasions. Pete brought out his harmonica, filling the bunkhouse with the plaintive strains of familiar tunes. Stories were shared, some August had heard before, others new to him, tales of the men's lives before Crooked Creek, of families left behind, of dreams still harbored despite the harsh realities of frontier existence. To Everett, Jim Harris proposed a toast as the evening wore on. May he find what he's looking for out there. The simple sentiment, echoed by the others as they raised their cups, touched August deeply. These men with whom he had shared work and hardship but little of his personal self, nonetheless wished him well with genuine feeling. It was yet another revelation of what he had been missing in his self-imposed isolation, the basic human connection of community, of shared experience, of belonging to something larger than himself. "I think I already have," August replied, his voice rough with emotion he no longer felt compelled to hide. "But thank you." The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect spring day for travel. August packed his belongings, now including several letters from Sophia that he kept carefully bundled together, and prepared Renegade for the journey to Helena. The other hands, despite the previous night's celebration, rose early to see him off. "Don't be a stranger, Everett," Pete said, clasping August's hand in a firm handshake. "Miller's place isn't so far you can't ride over for a visit now and then." "I won't," August promised, meaning it. These men, who had once been merely colleagues, had somehow become friends without his quite realizing it was happening. Another gift from the storm that had changed his life's direction. Hank Williams emerged from the main house as August was mounting up. The ranch owner approached with his characteristic direct stride, extending a hand. "Good luck, Everett," he said simply. "Crawford's got himself a good man." "Thank you, sir," August replied, clasping the offered hand, "for everything." Hank nodded, a man of few words who understood that sometimes the most important things required the least elaboration. "You've got a standing offer here if things don't work out," he said, "though I expect they will." With that final assurance, not that August would need to return, but that he could if circumstances required it, August turned Renegade toward the ranch gate and the road that would take him to Helena. To Sophia, to his future. The journey seemed shorter this time, perhaps because it was familiar, perhaps because he was traveling toward something rather than merely away. The landscape was transformed by spring, the hills green with new growth, wildflowers beginning to appear in sheltered valleys. August found himself noting features with new attention. The quality of grazing land, the locations of water sources, the types of vegetation that indicated soil conditions. He was seeing the territory now not just as a cowboy passing through, but as a potential rancher with an eye toward long-term prosperity. He arrived in Helena in the late afternoon, the sun still high enough to cast the town in golden light. As had become their custom, Sophia was watching for him, emerging from the mercantile as he approached. But this time there was a difference in her greeting, a certainty, a rightness that came from knowing this arrival wasn't temporary. "Welcome home," she said simply as he dismounted, the two words conveying everything that had changed in their circumstances. Home, the concept had been abstract for August for so many years, a memory of what he had lost rather than a reality he could claim. Now, in Sophia's welcome, in the town that spread around them, in the opportunities that awaited, he found himself embracing the possibility that home could be created anew, built from choice rather than merely inherited by birth. "It's good to be back," he replied, the understatement characteristic but his smile conveying what his words did not. Thomas Montrose emerged from the store, his welcome equally warm. "August, right on schedule. We've been preparing for your arrival." "Preparing?" August questioned, allowing Sophia to lead him toward the store entrance, his hand comfortably clasped in hers. "A small gathering this evening," Sophia explained. "Just a few people who wanted to welcome you properly to Helena. Mr. Crawford will be there, of course, with the papers for the Miller Ranch. And Reverend Donovan, who has been asking after you specifically." The mention of the local minister raised questions in August's mind, but he merely nodded, allowing himself to be guided into this new phase of his life with the same trust that had brought him back to Helena in the first place. The gathering that evening was indeed small but significant. Crawford and his wife, Reverend Donovan and his wife, the editor of the local newspaper and his daughter, and a few other prominent citizens of Helena. The conversation flowed easily, centered primarily around the Miller Ranch and August's plans for restoring it to full operation, but touching also on broader topics of territorial development, the coming railroad, and the growth of Helena as a commercial center. August found himself participating more actively than he might have expected, offering opinions on agricultural matters, discussing cattle breeds suitable for Montana's climate, even engaging in a spirited but good-natured debate with the newspaper editor about the impact of Eastern investment on frontier communities. Throughout, Sophia remained by his side, her presence both supportive and proudly possessive, making it clear to all present that they were a couple with shared interests and future plans. As the evening progressed, Crawford took August aside for the formal signing of their agreement. The terms were as discussed: a monthly salary plus a percentage of proceeds from cattle sales, with the understanding that after a year, They would revisit the arrangement to consider a possible purchase option if the ranch proved profitable. "I've arranged for supplies to be delivered tomorrow," Crawford informed him after the papers were signed. "Basic necessities to get you started, and Miller left most of the furniture in the house, so you'll have the essentials at least." "I appreciate that," August said, grateful for the practical assistance. "I plan to ride out first thing tomorrow to get a proper inventory before making additional purchases." Crawford nodded approvingly. "Sensible approach. Oh, and I took the liberty of having a man check the pastures yesterday. All 23 head accounted for, including a new calf born last week. Seems the herd is doing well despite minimal supervision." The news was encouraging. A healthy, breeding herd, even a small one, would provide a solid foundation for rebuilding.